Good morning, afternoon, and evening for anyone tuning in right now. Welcome to our fireside chat about the Global Threat Landscape Report for the second half of 2022. I am here today with our experts, Tony and Doug. I personally am so excited about this report. I know how much time and research went into it. And something that I have seen going through it is that we're seeing a lot of old tactics resurfacing now, like clever remake of an old film. Is there anything that surprises you guys anymore about what we're seeing, or is this pretty standard now?
Want to go first, or should I take this one?
Yeah, man. Go ahead, Doug. I think this is right up your alley, my friend.
Yeah, I can say that I'm surprised every day, right? It's an endless cat and mouse game where we see new techniques, we see new ways of implementing a new technique, and it's complicated, because there is a time between you discover something new, you try to understand how that works and create protection, but every day, at every hour, we output antivirus definitions, for instance. So yeah, I can say that I'm every day I got taken by surprise. So, whoa, how is that even possible? How are they doing this? And then when you start trying to replicate what they're doing, you say, okay, we need to either create a new signature for this specific malware, or this is something that is completely new. It's breaking all paradigms, and we need to go back to the development of the engine and create a new feature so we can have visibility into that thing. So every day is a little surprise. It's just raining around the corner.
Yeah, Monica, you mentioned something about reuse of old code, and I know kind of leading up to this final report here, I know Doug and I and a lot of other analysts were going back and forth with a lot of this stuff, right? Because at the end of the day, we all know that there's a lot of code reuse, but what happens is you get these, sort of signatures that then, sort of trigger. I mean, as an industry, we want to build different types of detection signatures that are going to detect one-to-many, right? I mean, we want to be able to build a signature that's going to detect a variety of different things. And the way you do that is by, certain, sort of triggering on certain snippets of code and what have you. When you have code reuse by some of those, threat actors, you might get a antivirus or, some type of detection signature with a specific name that's fairly old. You're like, is this really? No. This can't be, but really it's just it's probably triggering on some other kind of code that's being reused. I'm sure, Doug, you can expand upon that.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, that's an example with a couple of threats we've seen on this last semester, right? With Mortal Botnet and GandCrab, and even older samples, right? Like I think my Doom, we saw that. And code never dies, right? As long as it's being used and it's passing defenses, I mean, they're gonna get used. And when you look at the life cycle of AV signature creation, deployment, and detection on the wild, we have different databases, right? As if you are a Fortinet client, you know that there's an active, extended, and extreme, and depending on the product that you're using, old signatures go to the extended and extreme, and threat actors are aware of this. And once they understand that this is an old signature, it's code that possibly lightweight solutions are not detecting anymore, they're going to reuse, because they know somewhere for obviously performance reasons, it's not matching everything right now, right? So we have different types of databases that run on different types of products. FortiSandbox has all the databases. FortiClient, you can select if you're running on a lightweight node, you can select specifically if you're just going to do the active. So that's why they reuse, right? Because they're getting shells, right?
Yeah. So with that said, though, I mean, that's why from a vendor perspective, I mean, that's why we have technology around, EDRs that are detecting, activity, not necessarily specific sort of snippet in code. But
yeah, the defense in depth, right? You have to, if you're serious about security, you know exactly which solutions are capable of doing specific things. And if there are gaps, you bring in another solution to close the gap and keeps on going, right? or even get a new hardware and use extreme DB if you can't afford the solution. There's always avenues for improving your cybersecurity defense.
Yeah, so that's interesting, and I think that this is a good segue because I know our listeners are going to want to know where this data is even coming from. I know you kind of touched on it slightly.
Yeah, so as the report, as we release new versions of the report, we try to bring in more telemetry data so we can get more insights and strive to go to a complete view of the threat landscape as our solutions are capturing it. And right now, it's mainly FortiGate, AV, IPS, and botnet, FortiSandbox, EDR, and FortiRecon. FortiRecon is the first time we're bringing the data set to this report. It's a new solution from Fortinet that allows you to understand a little bit more about what's going on before an attack happens and what your exposures are. So it brings valuable insight for you to act before anything bad happens. So I think it's an interesting data set that we've just started, exploring and understanding how to draw insights from that data.
Yeah, I'd also add in there though, right? So we've also added in our incident response.
Sorry, Tony.
Yeah, and our managed detection and response services, right? I mean, we are seeing things, in the battlefield, right, as they're happening right then and there. So you kind of typically would always see sort of a macro view of things. Now we're kind of diving in a bit kind of deeper, and you're seeing exactly what's happening on those endpoints as the adversary is able to get a foothold into the environment. And we wanted to share some of those insights that we've been seeing with some of our incidents that we're handling with customers on a global global scale.
And it's interesting to see how it's different data sets, right? Because you have threats that can be stopped by IPS, some threats can be stopped by FortiSandbox, but the threats that actually go in and you have to take your team and go to the customer and understand what happened. It's a different type of threat. It's more advanced, it's more pervasive. It's a very interesting data set. Thanks for the contribution, Tony. Yeah.
Yeah, so when we're talking about incident response engagements, what did that look like across the industry? And were there more hits in one place than others?
Yeah. From our perspective, and kind of keep in mind, I mean, our data is biased, right? Because we're just, it's only our view of what we've been sort of seeing and kind of dealing with. But, when we look at the organizations that we've helped, through crisis situations, there really is no one industry, right? It's kind of pretty much almost equal across the board, equal opportunity for, every industry. And I think that's an indication of, when you look at the cybercrime ecosystem and you have those affiliates that are basically just trying to, they're opportunistic, right? They're really kind of trying to establish initial access, right? And then they sell that access over to some of the other, ransomware groups or what have you, or they work together. So I don't think we didn't see, at least in this entire, 2022, we really didn't see any specific industry that sort of stood out. It was just, more of an organization that might not have had the most robust, security program and what have you. And there was some low-hanging fruit that they took advantage of.
That's interesting. So was there a specific motivation that you saw for the threat actors?
Yeah. I mean, from that perspective, first and foremost, and I don't think it's going to be anything new to anybody, it was really the motivation was financial, right? I mean, out of that, I think those were the majority of the incidents that we actually sort of dealt with. And out of that, 82% of those, financially motivated incidents were really ransomware, right? So I don't think there's anything sort of new there. That's kind of where we're at with that.
Yeah, if you take a look at most of the financially motivated, is either ransomware or they're taking your data to sell, right? Espionage is, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is mostly nation state. So there's a smaller data set of groups that are actually just trying to, get your data, get your proprietary intellectual information, and capitalize on that, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we did see a couple of we dealt with a few nation state actors and whatnot, and obviously that took a little bit longer time to be able to evict them out of the environment. But yeah, that's there.
Yeah, and I'm sure for anyone who's going to be reading this amazing report that we just came out with, we did see in one of the sections that there was a 16% spike in ransomware, and then it kind of teeters. Can you elaborate on that? Because I know I had questions on that, and I'm sure others will as well.
Sure. So we've been tracking ransomware for quite some time. And across the years, what we see is kind of like a wave-like movement, right? We see every time we see new movement, the new wave, it comes out as a new higher peak. And then it slowly fades away until the next high peak. I think it's because of the actual cycle of affiliates onboarding and new malicious payloads versions. The data can tell us a lot about the cycles of development, and I think it is what it is, right? We have this wave-like movements of higher peaks, and then slowly phase down until the next high peak. So by looking at what our averages are, as you said, so it's about 16%, right? So it's slowly increasing in volume as they're getting ROI on their investments, right? They're getting good ROI.
Yeah. And so we see different ransomware variants popping up almost daily.
Oh yeah.
How does an organization deal with new groups? And do you think that we can keep up?
Yeah, we can definitely keep up. And the number of variants is almost unlimited, and it will continue to be so, because just a tiny bit of modification in the code, depending on how the signature, AV signature is created, it will bypass, right? So it's important to be able to adopt what we call advanced cybersecurity technologies like sandboxing, integrated with your FortiGate, your FortiClient, your FortiMail, EDR solutions that will be able to understand exactly what's going on at the operation system level. So even if a malware gets executed in your environment, if it trips into any of what we call the traps that EDR has, because it's looking for specific things through specific channels between the communication of any given process and the kernel, if it detects, it will be able to alert and diffuse that instantaneously. And also behavior-based analytics as deeper as your pocket can afford, right? It's all a risk-based equation at the end. And if you are able to do behavior-based analytics on endpoints for each specific user, for each specific system, you're gonna get a lot of stuff. And I very much doubted that any threat can pass through a very well-established behavior-based solution that is taking a look at every log, every bit of piece. The only problem is that there's a lot of data, right? So,
so I think Doug talked a little bit about how to detect those different variants and what have you. But from my view, right? I mean, there are specific kind of TTPs that adversaries are kind of doing when you look at ransomware. And those, particular sort of groups, you have so many different kind of variants, you have so many different groups. But at the end of the day, a lot of the things that happen before that destructive ransomware payload gets dropped are pretty much the same. A lot of the groups use those same kind of TTPs. There's a lot of overlap, right? They're leveraging PowerShell, right? To be able to do things. They're, to move laterally in the environment, that they're using kind of PowerShell, they're using kind of PSExec, they're spawning up additional services that then are running that particular malware. That's how they're then expanding, in the environment, right? They're doing things like, disabling, antivirus. There's a specific kind of tools that will, search through all of the different sort of services that are running, and they will, stop, something like Windows Defender. So it's like a lot of these different things, them using, remote control tools. So there's a lot of commonality here. So I think in the report, you'll kind of notice, and we have a couple different sort of heat maps that'll kind of show what some of those sort of TTPs are. And then you can start sort of focusing in on that, right? Kind of making sure that your security defenses are able to detect a lot of those, TTPs prior to that destructive ransomware payload getting dropped. Because you can stop it there before that they actually, ransom your kind of files. I mean, you're going to save lots of time, and more likely, you're going to save lots of money as well.
Yeah. So expanding on the TTPs, before we went live, we were talking a little bit more about just threat actors and how they are gaining confidence and just becoming more and more familiar, and that will equal new TTPs. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, well, yeah. So I guess what I kind of meant by that is, if we go back to, was it about a year or two ago, we saw that there was a bunch of different sort of playbooks that were kind of technical documents. I think kind of Conti ransomware, that was all out there. And you got an opportunity to, to see how in-depth some of these kind of technical documents are and what have you. And I think what we've seen over the years, and I used to get asked a lot, Tony, in your crystal ball, I mean, where do you see the next, TTPs occurring and that type of stuff? And what are they? And at the end of the day, what we saw last year, and I think it kind of sort of triggered me to actually mention this again, is that when there is a vulnerability that's found on a particular platform and it's successfully executed, of course, we all know the adversaries then are going to start to adopt that. They're going to see the success. So you're going to see the trend. But now that they saw that they can get on there, they're going to start getting more familiar with, for example, the Exchange server. They're going to know, okay, what else can I do? And what we've seen, not only are they using Exchange and web shells as initial access, now they're coming in other ways, right? And then they're scouring the net, looking for, other assets that are out there, finding the Exchange server. Of course, they're, compromising it. And then they're throwing modules on there that can basically, glean username and passwords as users are logging in and logging out of, Exchange OWA. So now they have it as a post-exploitation tool. They're using it for persistence. So you get an administrator that says, oh, hey, I got some accounts and it looks like they're kind of compromised. You do a password reset, and next thing you know, the account is still kind of compromised. These are the types of things that they're doing. Another example would be how we saw everybody starting to adopt to, VMware and being able to get into the VMware, whether it was through an exploit or just kind of getting, credentials there. They were locking the organization out, and they were then encrypting those VM files, holding those VM files hostage, and that worked great. But what we saw last year also is, instead of locking them out, they were then spinning up additional clean VMs with no security controls on them and using them as their home base, right? Because now they can kind of freely store a lot of their, malicious types of tools, and they don't have to they don't have to worry about being, detected by a security control, right? Because none of the security controls are actually on there. So I think it's important, to me, I guess, the moral of the story from a defender perspective is to really look at the technologies you have in your environment. And if those things get compromised, not only understand what the impact is to the business, but understand what else they could do, and then how you can be able to detect those types of additional sort of TTPs. Now you start anticipating things that adversaries may do in the future.
That's super interesting. Yeah. Understanding how they can leverage a resource if they get a hold of it as well, right? That's interesting.
Yeah. And so in the report, we did see a lot of old malware, such as Gans Crab coming back. Does that mean the gang is back?
It means that their code base is being used, and we are seeing hashes flying by with that code base, right? So What we did is we got the top 10 hashes, 10K hashes over across regions. And we run that through our genetic code basing solution. And we try to understand what is the most if code base out there, right? And we saw some old malware and some not so much, but it does mean that there's a lot of reuse of code and tools on this landscape, right? It's there, and I mean, what can we say about it? It's what the telemetry is telling us. It doesn't actually mean that the actual persons behind the GAN crab is back, because if I'm not mistaken, they've been arrested, a lot, at least a handful of them. But old threats will never die, right? And we are seeing telemetry of hashes with old code just because it's working, right? I don't see, and I was reading a report a couple of days ago before we published the report that says that about 40% of companies doesn't actually have any advanced cybersecurity solutions. So, you know, they get anyone that wants to get into the ransomware game can look up affiliate programs on the dark web. They can grab code from GitHub. Sometimes developers, malware developers on Twitter and on Telegram, they are advertising new, sometimes free, new ransomware variants, or even new ransomware families. And if anyone can do it, they just can. And there's obviously targets for it. So that's why we're seeing this.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So I'm thinking about what we were really trying to highlight in the report, and there were some main topics that kind of stood out. I know red zone was one of them.
Yeah.
So what's this red zone stuff about?
Yeah, this is the red zone came out as an attempt to help CISOs prioritize their patch schedule. So when you're a CISO and you are trying to defend your network with 20,000 assets, computers, laptops, servers, routers, firewalls, and you have like 1,000 vulnerabilities to patch, right? How do you prioritize that? Before the red zone, they would be able to, okay, let's see which ones are critical. Let's first isolate our critical assets, and on those critical assets, let's start by patching the critical vulnerabilities first. It's easier said than done, because if you have an asset that is working to, you know, as a very critical asset, you will apply one patch at a time, because if something goes wrong, you know what went wrong. You won't stop, let's say, a web server and patch it all, you know, because if something went wrong, where do you start? You end up losing time. So the red zone actually tries to map of all CVEs that are out there and disclosed, and then which ones that are disclosed and that we're seeing that they're still active on the endpoint, meaning that there's vulnerable endpoints. And from those vulnerable endpoints, which one of those vulnerabilities do we see actively being trying to be exploited on the network traffic through IPS telemetry? So we're correlating FortiClient vulnerabilities with FortiGate IPS detections, and we saw that it's just a small percentage, right? That are vulnerable and they're actively under attack. So that will help CISOs try to understand where to prioritize first, right? So, okay, I have a web server that's critical. I have a vulnerability that's critical. Is it being exploited on the wild? No. Oh, I have a medium vulnerability that is being actively exploited on the wild. Okay, let's patch this first. That's what we're trying to give insight into.
So we talk a lot about the attack framework for purple and red teams. Is there something that teams can do to prepare, you know, before an attack even happens?
Yes, there is, of course. So we've been doing a lot of work with MITRE and the Center for Threat Information Defense, trying to advance the state of cybersecurity, cyber threat intelligence tools, techniques, and systems. And the MITRE attack framework is a very good way of trying to understand how do your defenses will fare against the latest techniques. They have released a few reports, which are called the sightings ecosystem, that basically, gives you guidance on the most active techniques. The same thing as the red zone, right? MITRE, by publishing the sightings report, they are publishing that's called the red zone for techniques, right? So which ones you should focus first? But obviously there's something you can do before. So on October 2020, they have released the new recon and weaponization phase, which was previously called pre-attack. So before adversaries are actually, trying to exploit a given vulnerability on your environment, they have to do two things. They have to first understand that you have a vulnerability. They do reconnaissance, so scanning and understanding if they can, by doing scanning, they can get what version of Apache are you running, what version of a database is exposed. And once they do that, they say, okay, do we have a specific exploit at the dark web or even on open source intelligence that is able to exploit that vulnerability? Yes, then they go into the initial access, right? If they don't, they might develop or ask someone to develop. But that's the reconnaissance and weaponization phase. They understand that there's a vulnerability, they weaponize that vulnerability, and then they start the initial access by trying to exploit that vulnerability. So one thing that you can do is, so we're talking a lot about breaking the attack chain. The attack chain has two phases before initial access, which is recon and weaponization. And by using external active surface management solutions like FortiRecon, you can get an insight into that shatter in the dark web. As Tony has said, a lot of not only exploitation but credential access, right? Has your credentials been leaked by anyone, that might use this to breach your defenses? So keeping an eye and consuming threat intelligence on the recon and weaponization phase through those solutions is something that anyone can do, and it's something that proves to be a lot valuable because you're breaking the attack chain at its first phases, right?
Yeah, I'll probably double down on that a little bit. If I look into kind of insights into the incident response investigations. It was it 44, 45% of all the initial access into the environment was due to them having stolen credentials. Somehow they have gotten those particular credentials. And I'm not sure if kind of people realize that kind of impact, right? Because we've had a couple engagements that we investigated. And when we mapped everything back, right, we put the timelines together, we kind of documented all the actual sort of TTPs and what have you, guess what? No malware is being used, nothing at all, right? Because you got admin access, you're in the network and you're basically, perusing around the network as an admin. So unless you have UEBA stuff, right, to be able to identify anomalous, user behavior, kind of being able to map out normal behavior and being able to trigger on anything that kind of deviates outside of that normal behavioral pattern, you're going to have a hard time trying to identify those kind of TTPs kind of leading up to, in this case, it was a ransomware drop and it was just kind of BitLocker, right? So there was no malware used kind of whatsoever. So I think it's important that, just doubling down on what you were saying, Doug, kind of make sure that you have some visibility into the dark net to see if your things are being, your, credentials are already sort of stolen, but also having some type of UEBA, user behavior, there are, SIMs out there like FortiSIM that'll have those things out there to be able to identify, any anomalous kind of user activity.
Cool. So I'm definitely not as technical as you guys. What would you say was one of the most common mistakes that users made? Just kind of going off of this conversation.
So, I would go back to, are you meaning like, from an incident, like how did they get kind of compromised?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of contributing factors that kind of go into it, but I would think, you know, one of the biggest issues that we've seen and we continue to see over and over and over again. I mean, besides many of them don't have EDR-like technology. I mean, that's kind of standard. I say that all the time. They have some type of legacy antivirus, but they just don't know what to do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they thought they did. They talked it amongst themselves, but you know, once they're hit and they're in the battlefield and they're in sort of the, you know, thick of it, the fog of war kind of like settles in and they don't know what to do because they didn't have step-by-step, you know, procedures on what to do from detection to analysis to containment to remediation, you know, to recovery, back to lessons learned. They didn't have that stuff kind of documented. And that was probably one of the biggest things that we saw. The other thing was, you know, you always say this, hey, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? No, it's the same kind of case. If nobody is monitoring the environment or has the right kind of logging, you know, it's going to go unnoticed. So we've seen many times that there are logs and alerts that are going off, but no one's monitoring them. Yeah. So end up happening there. So that, you know, the visibility into what's happening in the network. And the last one, inadequate kind of patching. And I say that from an external monitoring perspective, right? Because there are, you know, quite a few of initial access kind of cases, right? So incidents where initial access was exploiting a vulnerability that was on an actual application or a services that was, publicly out there. So they didn't even realize that that was actually out there. So one, didn't have kind of visibility on that and didn't even know if there was a vulnerability on that as well. So those are probably the three things that I've seen that they made some mistakes.
Yeah. Doug, anything from your perspective?
I mean, I don't have the same insight as what caused a cybersecurity incident as Tony. But if I were to complement anything that he has said, is that possibly all of those companies didn't actually, as Tony stated, they don't actually look at their logs and they're not operationalizing the intelligence that's knocking on the door. I'm pretty sure that those guys had antivirus logs that said, hey, this virus is trying to get in. And sometimes it will get in, but if you get specific information on, okay, that antivirus signatures, what samples are they? Let's run them on a sandbox. Let's see if we have detection capabilities to, if this eventually goes through and this log won't be shown, where do we look, right? So I think it's more of a preparedness thing than anything else,
Yeah, Doug, you got me going here. I mean, I think
it's already bouncing back and forth.
Yeah. I mean, if you get the, I know we wanted to, there's one sense when you're, providing advice to, folks that don't have the right resources, that they just can't hire because many folks, and you have folks that maybe have a little bit more of, the resources and the skills there. And I think the advice there kind of leads into where that visibility piece I was saying, not only on the logging side and kind of having someone monitor, but then also making sure you're building these use cases that map back to the MITRE ATT&CK sort of framework, right? I mean, we refer to it as, there's many different ways. You mentioned kind of purple teaming. I've kind of mentioned, operationalizing MITRE ATT&CK framework before, but really understanding those kind of tactics and corresponding techniques the adversaries are using. It's all out there on the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and making sure that the security controls you have in your environment are going to either one, be able to detect and ultimately, be able to protect against that specific TTP.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not even a question of money, because there are a few open source CDR solutions that you can count, right? If you really don't have the money, you have nothing to do, you can count on that. It's there. It doesn't have the same, interface capabilities, features, but at least you have some visibility.
Yep. That's just, also kind of goes back, if you just want to, start collecting raw kind of data, I mean, you can get the Windows event logs, just have them go somewhere and start, sort of triggering on some of that stuff.
Yeah, the elk stack, right? Elasticsearch is there. Use it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have so many things going on in the report and what you guys have seen. We have wipers and log4j and different ransomware variants. I am going to give you guys the floor. So if there's anything that you guys want to highlight that you thought might be valuable, to chat through for our listeners, floor is yours.
Yeah, you want to go first or should I start?
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I mean, as we're seeing the quick development of new variants, new ways of deploying every single technique under the sun, it's important that you are able to consume and operationalize threat intelligence. Because if you have only antivirus, right? If you have only IPS, you have something to work with. Take a look at those logs, understand what's going on, what can happen if they are able to bypass that defense. Because if you're seeing IPS logs, it means that the firewall is getting that, but there are evasions, new evasions being developed. So that exploit might go through. And if it goes through, what are they deploying after they exploit that vulnerability? Which payloads have been linked to that specific vulnerability being exploited? And then you go to the next phase. Okay, for these payloads, what are the techniques? So let's get those techniques. Let's see if we have visibility into those techniques. Let's see if the tools that we have at our disposal are able to get that specific visibility. If not, what do we need to do? I think it's just a matter of people starting to understand that they need to be actively. It's a circle, right? You understand threat intelligence, you operationalize, you see where their gaps are, you close them, and then you go to the next log and you keep on this eternal CTI improvement life cycle, or otherwise you're gonna have to call Tony's team. that boils down to this.
Yeah, well, you see, so I'm sitting here listening to you, Doug, and I think I'm going to bring up that kind of message, just maybe one or two levels even kind of higher. What Doug was talking about, and I don't think you heard him say one thing about buy this product or buy that product. I think what's missing in the industry, from a technology perspective, the vendors have done a great job at innovation. We have amazing technologies that's able to help organizations. What we didn't do a good job as an industry as a whole is really educate our resources. We should have been doing this, 20, 30 years ago. We should have been kind of building really educational programs that were in depth on how to deal with all these things, from a cybersecurity perspective. We missed the boat on that. Now we are getting better. I mean, here at Fortinet, we're doing a lot of different things. We're offering our NSC kind of training at no charge whatsoever, and a variety of other things that we're kind of doing to hopefully try to bring those skill sets up. But I will go back to it's the people and the processes. As an organization, look at investing some of your time, some of your budget into working with security consulting sort of groups to be able to help do your assessments, help build your playbooks, right? Help do these kind of tabletop exercises. Look at your security operations center. If you need someone to help build those use cases to be able to talk about or kind of do what Doug was talking about, making sure you have the right sort of TTP detection there. Reach out to companies like us. I mean, at the end of the day, that's where I think, from my perspective, we really need to play sort of catch up on.
Well said, Tony.
Well said, indeed. I'm just going to do a real quick plug-in for our cyber predictions report. Just because we're talking right now about a lot of these vulnerabilities and things that we've seen in the past, is that something that you guys could potentially predict and maybe give our listeners some insight into what we might be seeing in 2023 based on what we've seen these past 6 months and the 6 months before that?
I would say that we'll continue to see the quickly weaponization of zero-day vulnerabilities. Because if we look back, 2017, 2018, 2019, most of the vulnerabilities that were widely exploited, right, were older. Now we're seeing that they are really quick to develop new exploits for those vulnerabilities, and that those vulnerabilities are being exploited way quicker. We saw that with Log4j, we saw that with Proxy Shell, and I think that the time that it took for someone to be prepared against the next big cyber attack is shrinking, right?
Mm.
So just keep that in mind, I guess. It might shrink a little bit more. It's hard to tell, but that's where I see it going, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that, on that same thing, right? I mean, not only like look for how fast they're going to be able to do that, but then I'll go back to that same message I used before, because in my mind, I think it's a powerful one. Look at those platforms that are going to have new vulnerabilities on them. They're going to have, you know, they'll not only be successfully exploited, but very quickly, I think you'll see the familiarity and the expertise on those platforms get entered into these technical documents, and they're going to learn more ways that they can take advantage of that platform that now has a vulnerability that they can successfully exploit. So from the crystal ball perspective, again, I go back to, as a defender, start doing this. Look at your platforms you have in your environment, you know, understand if someone gets admin access, not only look at the impact to the business, but go back and look at what else can they do. You know, I go back to the VMware one again. They're sort of spinning up sort of VMs like that. What could you do if someone's spinning up a VM? Can you detect that? And then if they do get on it, what can you do? You know, you can make sure that you have a good asset management, and you can see when any rogue devices are actually spinning up or spinning down. You can also be able to, you know, when a VMware, VM sort of spins up, you maybe don't give it access to everything in the network, right? And maybe, you know, so there's a lot of things that, you know, you may be able to do. So I guess that's just my kind of addition there. So, you know, Doug's saying they're going to continue to use those new, you know, 0 days a lot faster. They're going to integrate them into their playbooks. And then once they do that, they're also going to learn that technology a lot faster. And they're going to leverage it in very unique ways that you might not necessarily sort of know of. You'll know of it after you start to see the trend, but hopefully you hear about it kind of prior, or you anticipate it, you know, before it happens.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I know it sounds like I've been fixating so much on all of these old tactics that we've been seeing, but anything that you might want to highlight that has been new on the threat landscape?
Let me see. Well, we saw like I think it was the Raspberry robbing botnet, right, Tony? That, I mean, it was, we know that the cybercrime is almost like a regular organization. They have specific responsibilities, people in junior, senior roles trying to do, but the Raspberry robbing worm and botnet, from the infrastructure to the defensive evasiveness deployed on the worm, it was something that was like enterprise grade software, because it had 14 layers of evasion. Their infrastructure was multi-layered with redundancy. It was something that was crazy. And I think we're going to start seeing more of this, you know. And when you talk about multiple layers of evasion, this is something you always see. If you take a look at TTP heat maps, you have like a lot of defense evasions, right? But 14, 15, 16, it's a lot. I mean, it takes a lot of time to reverse. Reversers won't be able to do this in like one or two or even 3 days, depending on the number of evasions. And the longer it takes for a reverser to understand what's going on, the longer it will take to you to understand how you can hunt for other things in your environment. So I think they're doubling down on the defense evasion ones, just so that it will take you more time to understand what's going on and actually look for other systems that are compromised, right? And within that time, they do whatever they can.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it's all gonna happen. I think it's I guess what we're all sort of trying to say. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, even if you're doing everything right, things are gonna happen, right? So I always say this, kind of quite often, if you heard me sort of speak before, is I say, measure your security operations center on how quickly they can identify something that's a sort of a threat in the environment and how fast they can eradicate it, as opposed to measuring them on if a threat kind of gets in or not, because it's inevitable. I mean, it's going to happen, it's going to get in.
And trying to shorten the time, right? Okay, we were able to detect and diffuse this threat in like 3 days. Okay, let's shorten to 2. What happened? What can be improved? And this is
these are the things that we work on with organizations from their key performance metrics. These are things that we help them be able to define. So their success rate is going to be better. Instead of saying, hey, just kind of keep the bad guys out, bad actors out. Monica, I know I kind of went off on a tangent there, but going back to your kind of question on what's new, I mean, if we look at the heat map, we did see, it's not a new kind of technique, but I didn't kind of see this up top for a while, but the drive-by, compromises, I didn't kind of dig into that a lot, but I don't know, maybe you have a little bit more sort of insight, Doug, but that kind of seemed like, from initial access kind of point of view, when you guys were looking at it within FortiGuard Labs, that seemed to be fairly high up there. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, we've seen over the course of last year, on the last months, basically, a lot of malicious advertisements on Google, right? So people paying Google to advertise cracked versions of software that would contain malware. So I think that's something that Google is cracking down on it, but there was certainly an uptick in drive-by downloads because of this new creative way that malicious actors found to be deploying their malicious payloads. I mean, their creativity we have to take our hat to their creativity because they keep on innovating, right?
Yeah. So just kind of coming closer to the end now, if you were to offer, just a few key takeaways, what would you say?
I think we've covered a lot of data already, but I would say that specifically for APTs, they never give up, right? Advanced persistent threats, they have advanced and persistent in their name for a reason. So if you find any indication of a virus signature that has been used by APT actors, any vulnerability that's triggering that has been found exploited by threat actors, nation-state threat actors, APTs, take a deeper look into that, understand what's going on, what might be coming down the pipeline if that goes through. I think that's the main takeaway, right? That we haven't covered still, right? Because we've talked about being aware of the pre-attack. We covered about the old code reuse. I think that's from my side. That's the majority of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say the same thing. I think I wove in a lot of things to do and kind of key sort of takeaways there. So I don't think there's anything else that's sort of stands out. I mean, only that I just kind of go back and it's like a broken record, for me, just kind of looking at the, all the incidents and what have you, it's a people and a process thing. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's, time and time again, that's what I actually sort of see. That's what my team sees, from the MDR side, from, the incident response side, we constantly see that it's not necessarily the technology is kind of triggering on something, but initial access or however they got in or what have you or the expansion of that attack, the impact was much worse, because that's something to do with the people in the processes. They just didn't have those things nailed down, like maybe they sort of should have, and they could have either minimized or not allowed that attack to happen. It might have never happened, and so they could have mitigated, or at least they could have reduced the impact that incident may have had on their environment.
Yeah, and I assume in addition to the solutions that we have, just security awareness training.
Oh yeah.
Right, making sure that everyone in the organization understands kind of what to look out for.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would recommend as far as solutions, products, services that our listeners can kind of think about, take with them, maybe do a little bit more research, whether it's from us or just in general?
Yeah, you said, right, being aware, because everyone has to do their part, right, when it comes to security. And attackers understand that the human element is the weakest link. Just because, we like cute cats and I'm going to click on that link because there's a cute cat, or I'm really tired and I haven't actually paid attention to that minimal detail on that phishing email and I clicked. It happens, right? So I guess, and we have security awareness training on NSC. We have the FortiFish, which allows you to run those specific campaigns to train your personnel to identify specific malicious emails. I mean, it's all at the end of the day, it's all about breaking the human element, right? And they know this because it's one of the most used ways into getting into the environment.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, if you've ever looked at our solution portfolio, you'll actually see that we have all types of solutions across the board. We're covering the entire attack chain, right? So I mean, just kind of off the top of my head, right, the things that we talked about specifically, today, FortiRecon's definitely one of them, right? We talked about how, at least from my side and also from from the vulnerability, there are a lot of things out there that they're just they're not patching as quickly, which is understandable, but they don't have visibility into that. So with FortiRecon, you got the external attack surface sort of scanning, kind of being able to identify what's there, what vulnerabilities actually are able to exist. The compromised accounts. I mean, we've seen so many of them in our investigations. FortiRecon would definitely help be able to sort of pre-alert if your actual kind of credentials are already being sort of sold on the darknet. So that was one. I'd also say from a services perspective, well, you got FortiEDR, right? We talked about how there's so many different variants and what have you, and Doug mentioned about being able to have solutions that are more behavioral based. FortiEDR, FortiXDR, great solutions for that. Adding on top of that, experts monitoring that particular technology, doing the analysis and and the response kind of 24/7, I think would be good. You got SOC as a service also that's monitoring things on your FortiGates, FortiClient and a variety of other things. So you got that aspect of it. And then sort of finally, you have from a security consulting point of view, you got assessments that we're offering. You got playbook development, you got kind of tabletop exercises. We have a variety of other assessments, things that are coming out. So a lot of things that we can definitely do, Monica.
Love it. I love it. Well, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to sit with us, chat about just the threat landscape in general and what we've seen. I hope this has been beneficial to everyone listening here. We are going to have the report for you guys to download in the following links, some assets that you guys can download as well. And then we have Accelerate coming up as well. So if that's something that you guys are interested in, come see us. Our experts are always here to help. Thank you.
Awesome.
Guys, see ya.
Later.